In the quiet suburb of Maplewood Estates, everything looked perfect. Each lawn was neatly trimmed, every mailbox matched, and the driveways gleamed with freshly sealed concrete. It was the kind of neighborhood where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. The homeowners association made sure of that. For most residents, this control brought comfort. But for one man, it soon became a nightmare. His name was Marcus Turner, a soft-spoken yet determined chef who had recently moved into the neighborhood. After working years in restaurant kitchens, Marcus decided to chase his dream, running his own food truck. It wasn't just a job to him. It was freedom, a way to create, to connect, and to finally be his own boss. Every morning, the smell of sizzling butter, smoked meats, and fresh herbs drifted from the driveway of his modest home. The truck, painted in deep red with the name Turner's Table scrolled across the side, was Marcus's pride. It wasn't flashy or loud. He kept it clean, parked it neatly, and even made sure not to block the sidewalk. For months, no one seemed to care. Neighbors waved. Kids stopped by for breakfast sandwiches before school. Even a few HOA board members grabbed lunch from him on weekends, but peace in Maplewood Estates never lasted long. The trouble began the day a new HOA president moved in, a woman named Cheryl Patterson. Known for her severe haircut and love of order, Cheryl saw herself as the guardian of the neighborhood's standards. Within a week, she had sent out 5 violation notices and 3 friendly reminders. She inspected lawns like a drill sergeant, snapping photos of garden gnomes she deemed inappropriate. When she spotted Marcus's food truck one morning, she didn't see a small business or a hardworking neighbor. She saw an eyesore, a commercial operation parked in her pristine community. The first letter arrived that week. It was crisp, cold, and formal, accusing Marcus of operating a business within residential zoning and parking a commercial vehicle in a private driveway. The letter demanded that he remove the truck immediately or face escalating fines. Marcus was stunned. He wasn't running the business from his driveway. The truck was merely parked there between shifts. He sold food downtown, miles away from Maplewood Estates. But rules, Cheryl insisted, were rules.at first. Marcus tried reasoning with her. He wrote back, explaining that his truck was fully licensed and insured, that it met every city regulation. He offered to show her documentation. Days passed with no reply. Instead, another letter arrived, this time with a $250 fine attached. That was just the beginning. Soon, Cheryl began her campaign. She drove by Marcus's house daily, taking photos of the truck. She left notes on his windshield about neighborhood uniformity. At HOA meetings, she spoke publicly about certain residents who were bringing down property values. Everyone knew who she meant. Marcus began noticing subtle changes. Neighbors who once waved started avoiding eye contact. Someone filed a noise complaint about his generator, even though it wasn't running. One morning, he found his trash cans knocked over and a smear of mustard on the truck's side panel. It wasn't just rules anymore. It was harassment. Still, Marcus refused to give up. He had fought too hard to build his dream. He contacted the city zoning office, reviewed his HOA bylaws, and even spoke to an attorney friend. What he discovered made his blood boil. The HOA had no authority to regulate vehicles like his unless they were being used for business on-site. The entire campaign against him was based on nothing but Cheryl's personal opinion. But logic didn't matter to her. She doubled down. Fines climbed to $500, then $1,000. The HOA began threatening to tow the truck. They even sent out a neighborhood-wide email accusing Marcus of illegally storing hazardous equipment. Marcus realized something that day. The fight wasn't about a rule. It was about power. Cheryl wanted control, and she thought she could bully him into submission. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to back down quietly. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. Marcus had just finished his breakfast shift downtown when he returned home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across his windshield. Notice of violation, immediate removal required. In the middle of the street, Cheryl stood with her clipboard, arms folded, watching. She smirked as he pulled up. Behind her, 2 other board members stood awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. It was a public show of authority, a message to the whole neighborhood. Marcus didn't say a word. He just looked at her, then at the sticker, and drove the truck slowly into his driveway. Inside, he sat in silence for a long time, staring through the windshield. Anger churned in his stomach, but beneath it was something sharper. Resolved that if the HOA wanted to make him the villain, he would play the role, on his own terms. That night, Marcus started planning. He combed through every bylaw, every clause, every obscure line of legal text the HOA had written. He noticed something Cheryl had overlooked, something small but powerful. According to the association's rules, the HOA's common lot, the area in front of their clubhouse, was considered a publicly accessible space during community events. It wasn't private property during those hours, and as it happened, a community cleanup day was scheduled for the following weekend. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. It was bold, maybe even reckless, but after weeks of humiliation, it felt right. He spent the next few days preparing in secret. He restocked the truck, cleaned every inch of stainless steel, and crafted a special menu for what he called Maplewood's tastiest protest. He reached out quietly to a few supportive neighbors, the ones who'd whispered encouragement when no one else dared. Word spread fast. By the time Saturday morning arrived, the smell of sizzling bacon and maple-glazed waffles wafted through the neighborhood before sunrise. Residents poked their heads out, curious. Children followed the scent to the clubhouse lawn, where Marcus had parked his bright red food truck front and center. Right there, on HOA property. The line of customers began forming almost instantly. Neighbors laughed, ordered coffee, took photos. The tension that had hung over the street for weeks began to lift. People smiled again, but Cheryl hadn't arrived yet. And when she did, everything would change. By mid-morning, Maplewood Estates was buzzing like it hadn't in years. The HOA's community cleanup day was supposed to be a quiet, orderly event. Folding tables, a few trash bags, and maybe some lukewarm coffee served in paper cups. Instead, it had turned into a full-blown neighborhood gathering. The air was rich with the scent of sizzling sausage and toasted bread. Children laughed, neighbors mingled, and for the first time in a long time, people looked genuinely happy to be outside. And right in the center of it all stood Marcus's bright red food truck, parked proudly in the HOA's own lot. Its chrome gleamed under the morning sun. Music played softly from a speaker. A chalkboard sign beside it read, "Serving the neighborhood with love." People lined up eagerly, ignoring the folding table where the HOA had set up its sign-in sheets and donation jars. Even those who had previously sided with Cheryl couldn't resist the smell or the cheerfulness of the scene. Someone had brought a lawn chair. Another neighbor, who'd never spoken more than 2 words to Marcus before, complimented his breakfast burritos. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Marcus worked calmly, handing out orders with a polite smile. He didn't boast or gloat. He didn't even speak about the ongoing dispute. He simply did what he loved, feeding people. Then, the silver SUV appeared. It was impossible to miss. A spotless luxury car that gleamed almost as harshly as the woman stepping out of it. Cheryl Patterson had arrived. She stood at the edge of the crowd, frozen in disbelief. Her clipboard was tucked under her arm, her sunglasses perched low on her nose. It took her only a few seconds to process what she was seeing. Then her jaw tightened, from where Marcus stood inside his truck. He saw her coming, a slow, furious march across the parking lot. The crowd began to quiet. Conversations died down. One by one, heads turned to watch. Marcus didn't move. He kept serving food, deliberately calm, though his heart beat faster with every step she took. Cheryl reached the truck and stopped just short of the serving window. Her voice was sharp, her words clipped and cold. Though Marcus couldn't hear her exact phrasing through the noise, her meaning was clear. She was demanding that he leave immediately. Her hand gestured at the pavement, her face flushed red. But Marcus didn't budge. He simply handed a customer their order, thanked them politely, and turned back to his grill. The gesture was small but powerful, a public refusal to be intimidated. The tension thickened. A few of the neighbors nearby began murmuring. Someone muttered that Marcus was within his rights. It was a community event, and the space was open to all residents. Another whispered that the food was the best thing that's happened to Maplewood in years. Cheryl's voice grew louder. Her face twisted with outrage. She pulled out her phone, likely calling for backup. Another board member, or perhaps even the towing company she so often threatened to summon. But no tow truck came. No one else intervened. The board members who had shown up for the cleanup day were standing off to the side, frozen in awkward silence. They knew what Marcus knew. He wasn't technically breaking any rules. The HOA's own bylaws said the common area was open for community use during sanctioned events. And this event, ironically organized by Cheryl herself, fit the definition perfectly. When she realized this, Cheryl's fury only deepened. She marched off to the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, Marcus thought she might be gone for good. But 10 minutes later, she returned carrying a stack of printed papers, fresh violation notices. She began handing them out, not just to Marcus, but to anyone who had purchased food from him. Her voice, now shrill with desperation, echoed across the lot. She accused the residents of supporting illegal activity, of undermining community values. That was the moment the crowd turned. A neighbor named Joyce, one of the HOA's longest-standing members, stepped forward. She'd lived in Maplewood Estates for 20 years, always paying her dues, always following the rules. But this time, she'd had enough. In a steady voice, she reminded Cheryl that this was supposed to be a community day, not a personal crusade. She pointed out the obvious: the food truck wasn't causing harm. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't messy. It was bringing people together. Others chimed in. One man reminded Cheryl that Marcus had fed half the neighborhood for free after a power outage last winter. Another mentioned that he always donated leftovers to the local shelter. Slowly, voices rose in agreement. Cheryl tried to shout over them, but her control of the situation was slipping away. What had started as her stage for authority had become a public reckoning. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed quiet, letting his neighbors speak for him. He didn't gloat. He didn't taunt her. He simply stood by his truck, calm and steady, flipping another set of pancakes as the crowd rallied around him. By noon, Cheryl was visibly shaking with anger. The line at the food truck was longer than ever. Local kids were taking photos. Someone even live-streamed the whole thing to social media, capturing Cheryl's red-faced fury and the sea of cheerful residents enjoying breakfast behind her. By the end of the event, the video had already spread beyond the neighborhood. The caption read, "HOA tries to shut down local food truck. Entire neighborhood rebels." The comments section exploded. Strangers online cheered Marcus on, mocking the HOA's pettiness. Support poured in from nearby communities. People shared their own stories of overzealous neighborhood boards. That afternoon, Cheryl left the event early, retreating to her home with the leftover violation notices still clutched in her hand. She didn't speak to anyone as she passed. Marcus, on the other hand, stayed until the last cup of coffee was served. As he packed up his truck, neighbors approached him one by one, offering thanks, apologies, and support. Many admitted they'd been afraid to speak up before, but seeing him stand his ground had inspired them. Still, Marcus knew it wasn't over. Cheryl wouldn't give up easily. He could already imagine the emails, the emergency board meetings, the new rules they'd try to pass in retaliation. But now the power dynamic had shifted. She'd lost the neighborhood's trust and gained the internet's attention. That night, as Marcus parked the truck in his driveway, he noticed something different. For the first time in weeks, no one had left a nasty note. No one was spying from their windows. The street was quiet, calm, almost peaceful. He stood outside for a long moment, looking at the stars above Maplewood Estates. The air still smelled faintly of maple syrup and grilled bacon. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he had a feeling the story wasn't done yet. Because Cheryl Patterson was not the kind of person to admit defeat quietly, and when she struck back, she'd make sure the entire neighborhood felt it. The days following the food truck standoff were unusually quiet in Maplewood Estates. The kind of quiet that felt heavy, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The community cleanup video had gone viral, millions of views, hundreds of comments cheering for Marcus and mocking the HOA's dictatorship. For a brief moment, Marcus had become something of a local hero. But heroes don't stay out of trouble for long in HOA country. Within a week, the retaliation began. It started small, a formal notice tucked under Marcus's door, stating that the board was reviewing policy updates regarding commercial vehicles. A few days later, a second notice arrived announcing a special meeting to address ongoing violations impacting community standards. Though it didn't mention Marcus by name, everyone knew exactly who it was about. Cheryl Patterson was regrouping. Marcus could almost picture her in her pristine kitchen, surrounded by binders of bylaws, highlighting passages, drafting memos, determined to reclaim her control. But this time, something was different. The community wasn't on her side anymore. Neighbors who used to nod along with her petty enforcement were now avoiding her entirely. Some had even emailed the board demanding she step down. Yet, Cheryl pushed forward, convinced she could still win. On the night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner. The air was thick with tension and the faint smell of reheated coffee. Cheryl sat at the front, her expression composed but her hands gripping her clipboard tightly. Marcus arrived quietly, not as a troublemaker, but as a resident exercising his right to be heard. The whispers began the moment he walked in. People greeted him warmly, offering nods of support. Even a few who had stayed neutral before were now openly on his side. When the meeting began, Cheryl wasted no time. Her tone was cold and bureaucratic as she introduced the new proposal. A bylaw amendment banning all commercial vehicles, food preparation equipment, and items that may constitute a business operation from being parked in residential driveways. Violations would carry daily fines. Her voice trembled slightly as she read the details, though she masked it behind forced authority. Marcus listened in silence. He knew this wasn't about rules, it was about her pride. But when Cheryl opened the floor for comments, the silence that followed wasn't the compliance she expected. It was resistance. One by one, residents stood up. A young couple spoke first, pointing out that several neighbors drove work vans, landscaping trucks, and cleaning service vehicles that would now be banned under the new rule. Were they supposed to park miles away from home every night? A retired teacher reminded everyone that Marcus's truck had never caused damage or disturbance. She asked why the board was spending its energy punishing one of the few people bringing joy to the neighborhood. Even one of the other board members, clearly uncomfortable, admitted that the new proposal was a bit extreme. Cheryl's control was slipping again. Her face flushed red as she tried to regain order, insisting this was not personal. But her words rang hollow. The room knew better. Then, Marcus stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse or mock. He simply spoke with quiet conviction. He explained how he'd worked for years to build his food truck business, how it was parked at home only between shifts, how he'd followed every rule until the rules began to shift beneath him. He described the harassment, the fines, and the humiliation, but also the kindness he'd seen from neighbors who rallied behind him. He ended by reminding everyone of one simple truth. Communities are built by people, not paperwork. When he sat down, the room erupted in applause. Cheryl's face froze, her composure cracking for the first time. The vote was called shortly after. The proposal failed, overwhelmingly. Nearly every hand in the room rose against it. Cheryl's supporters had vanished. She sat silently as the decision was finalized, the clipboard trembling in her lap. That night marked the beginning of the end for her reign over Maplewood Estates. Within a month, Cheryl resigned as HOA president. Officially, she cited personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew she couldn't face the humiliation anymore. She sold her home shortly after, moving out quietly one morning before dawn. Few noticed her leaving. Fewer cared. As for Marcus, life slowly returned to normal. He continued running Turner's Table, still parking his food truck in his driveway between shifts. Only now, it wasn't a point of contention, it was a symbol. Neighbors waved when they saw it. Some even brought him baked goods as thanks. The video that had sparked everything continued to spread, turning Marcus into something of a local legend. Reporters reached out. Other homeowners from across the country wrote him messages of support, sharing their own stories of standing up to overzealous HOAs. Marcus didn't bask in the fame. He kept his head down, kept cooking, and focused on what he loved most: feeding people. But he couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that the same truck Cheryl had tried to ban now stood as a quiet monument to her defeat. Months later, the HOA held another community event, a spring fair. This time, they didn't just allow Marcus's food truck. They invited it. His menu board proudly listed a new item: the HOA special sweet, spicy, and served with revenge. It sold out within the hour as the sun set that evening. Marcus looked out at the smiling faces of his neighbors, the children chasing each other across the grass. The once feared HOA now reduced to friendly volunteers collecting trash bags and laughing. The air was filled with warmth, not just from the food, but from the unity that had grown out of the chaos. He realized then that victory hadn't come from anger or defiance, but from patience, persistence, and a little creativity. Cheryl had tried to silence him, but in doing so, she had amplified his voice. And in Maplewood Estates, where every lawn still matched and every mailbox gleamed, one red food truck stood proudly in a driveway, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes it's simply delicious.